They were Americans with a forbidden faith.
The reason we were brought to Mexico was to create a place where we could live our religion freely.
But this colony of polygamous Mormons will be the setting for a murderous tale of Cain and Abel.
Anybody that opposed him, he went after him.
At its center, a cult leader whose decrees will lead to up to 30 murders. A man who continues to kill, even from beyond the grave.
It becomes this kind of blood orgy.
And then, a second evil will rise. Ruthless drug lords.
One option was arm ourselves and go look for him.
Tainted with tragedy.
My children were all crying and weeping, and we were so shocked.
Marked with courage.
Benjamin was threatened and told to back down, to keep quiet.
We got bullet holes here. This is the one that hit me.
This is the story of the American colony that resisted the drug cartels and lives in the terrible shadow of a cult leader known as the Mormon Manson. "200 miles south of the U.S. border in northern Mexico lies a community with a history like no other. Its children learn American-style English.
2 + 1.
Many of their parents have American and Mexican citizenship and drive American cars. It's called Colonia LeBaron, and it's home to 1,200 descendants of Mormons from America. Tough men like Brent LeBaron.
I'm from Colonia LeBaron, Galeana, Chihuahua, Mexico. Born and raised here. I'm a Mexican-born American.
So what are these American fundamentalist Mormons doing here in Mexico? The answer harks back to a divine belief in having multiple wives.
For fundamentalist Mormons, the idea of plural marriage is absolutely crucial and central to the religion.
Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, had a revelation in the 1840s that his followers should practice polygamy. But under pressure from U.S. federal authorities, the Mormon Church removes the practice from official doctrine in 1890. Polygamy becomes illegal, forcing so-called fundamentalist Mormons who believed it should not be abandoned to split from the mainstream Mormon Church. A few small polygamous colonies form, while other fundamentalists avoid the law by heading south of the border.
After polygamy was outlawed, there was a huge move of fundamentalists, of polygamists, to Mexico because they could continue to practice polygamy and not be ostracized or attacked by the authorities.
In the 1920s, a Mormon named Alma Dayer LeBaron is excommunicated from the Church of Latter-day Saints because of his polygamy. He moves from Utah to Mexico, hoping to practice his religious beliefs in peace.
Their beliefs were they lived plural marriage, so my great-grandfather actually moved to Colonia LeBaron kind of for that purpose, to escape a little bit of the persecution that he and his family were getting.
The reason we were brought to Mexico was to create a place where we could live our religion freely.
In 1944, Alma Dayer and his 2 wives found Colonia LeBaron, raising their family as Mormon fundamentalists. It's supposed to be a place of peace. But little do they know, their colony will spawn a horror far worse than the persecution they left behind. It all starts when the family patriarch Alma Dayer LeBaron dies in 1951. He leaves behind 7 sons, all of whom take multiple wives.
I just grew up knowing that I was going to have to share my husband with other women.
Irene Spencer was one of those wives. She marries Alma Dayer's youngest son, Verlin, in 1953. He already has one wife and will eventually marry 8 more.
I actually attended 4 of my husband's weddings. How would you like to go to your husband's wedding?
Just like Mormonism's 19th century pioneers who founded Salt Lake City to escape persecution, Irene and the LeBarons face a hardscrabble existence.
When I came here and just saw the adobe houses, that was bad enough, but I walked in, there was adobe walls, no plaster, no paint, just plain cement floors. We had no electricity. I actually lived for, I think, 17 years without electricity, and it was very rough, very hard.
In polygamous Mormon communities, large families are considered a virtue, adding to the strain on Irene.
I had 13 children in 19 years. You don't have time to take care of them when you're in poverty. You're cooking beans and rice and trying to just make ends meet to feed the little kids, you know.
Among the sons of Alma Dayer, it's the 4th eldest who will emerge as a natural leader. His name, Joel LeBaron.
Oh, Joel was calm and sweet and loving and kind. He was a nice guy.
But in 1955, Joel becomes convinced he's been chosen by God.
He got this revelation that he was to be the one mighty and strong, and the redeemer, essentially, of the Mormon faith.
Revelations, where a believer receives a divine instruction from God, are a cornerstone belief of the Mormon faith. In 1832, Joseph Smith claimed to have a revelation that predicted, "The Lord God will send one mighty and strong, holding the scepter of power in his hand to set in order the house of God." Over 120 years later, Joel LeBaron claims he is that fabled one mighty and strong. He journeys to the Mormon heartland of Salt Lake City, where in the Utah State Capitol building, he files articles of incorporation for a new church, entirely separate from the mainstream Mormon church.
We are gathered here today under the guidance of the Lord, who has made me your...
He calls it the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, and recruits his family to join it.
And we shall always be here.
I'll tell you the reason I joined was because I didn't want to be left out.
Joel bases his church in Colonial LeBaron, where it continues today. He's revered as the church's true prophet, but it's a role for which Joel will pay a heavy price. Charlotte LeBaron marries into a polygamous Mormon family in the 1950s, and later finds herself embroiled in one of the deadliest family feuds in American history.
It wasn't just a political or religious rival. It was against men, women, and children.
At the epicenter of the conflict, 2 LeBaron brothers. Joel, the self-proclaimed prophet and leader of the fundamentalist Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, and his younger brother, Ervil.
It was as comfortable being with Joel as it was in an old pair of shoes. That's the way people felt with Joel. And Ervil resented that.
Just 18 months apart in age, Joel and Ervil LeBaron had been inseparable growing up. But by the early 1960s, as Joel's power grows and his converts boost the population of Colonia LeBaron to 500, Ervil is tiring of being in his brother's shadow.
It was a very competitive relationship. The 2 siblings closest in age, and there was clearly a lot of sibling rivalry.
Ervil begins a strategy to unseat his brother. He starts to destabilize the colony by dictating who should marry who.
The whole idea of plural marriage was completely based on a different premise. where the woman had her choice. The marriage ceremony for entering plural marriage says, do you of your own free will and choice give yourself to this man, or does he take you as his wife? Of their own free will and choice. And that's very much emphasized. And Ervil wasn't that way. He wanted to be the one that was directing. And it became a real problem.
He told me that nobody could get married or function in any way, shape, or form unless he gave the say-so.
Ervil's hunger for power escalates. He tries to convince women already wedded to his brothers that God wants them to marry him.
He said I was committing spiritual adultery by living with my husband because I actually belonged to him.
So he would have revelations that a certain woman, they tended to be very attractive, should be sealed, as it's referred to in Mormonism, should be sealed to him.
Ervil's role in his brother's church is to collect tithes from followers. But he begins to use the money to line his own pockets.
He would go to followers of Joel and say, oh, you need to lend me $3,000 for this project. And of course, the money was never repaid. Or it would be, again, it would be a revelation from God that the follower should give them $3,000.
In contrast to the humble lifestyle of his brother Joel, Ervil has an attraction to the finer things in life.
By the mid-1960s, Ervil was increasingly obsessed with money, with living well. And Colonia LeBaron and the other outposts of the church were very threadbare, very hard scrabble places, set down in these kind of arid flats of northern Mexico. And Ervil liked to drive new cars, he liked to dress nicely. Ervil wanted to live large, and to live large, you need money. So he increasingly was coming up with schemes. One scheme was to build this tourist marina in Baja California. That fell through. There was a gold mining scheme. There was a number of different schemes that Ervil came up with, and they all kind of collapsed. But as a result, and because of his lifestyle, because he had 12, 13 wives to support, he was always grasping among the followers for more money.
Then Ervil claims that he, not Joel, is the man Joseph Smith predicted would set in order the house of God. The prophesized one mighty and strong.
It was very clear Ervil was increasingly wanting to take over the church from Joel.
But there can be only one prophet in this church. Joel excommunicates his brother. Cast out, Ervil's jealousy blooms into vengeance. Now in San Diego, Ervil starts his own church. He convinces some of Joel's followers to join him.
My brother's disregard for my authority is an act of treason against the heavens.
He tells them they've been called by God to rid the world of sinners who have lost their way.
And it is punishable by death in this world.
Starting with his brother Joel.
Ervil had told me, he said, I want you to know Joel will be put to death. Like that.
Irene decides to warn Joel of the death threat Ervil has made against him and his younger brother Verlin.
I said, Ervil said that you and Verlin are going to be put to death. And he shed tears. He said, you know what? If he wants to be a son of perdition and kill us, why, let's find out,
To motivate his devotees, Ervil claims that any killing will be justified by an ancient doctrine long abandoned by mainstream Mormonism.
It's punishable by death.
A doctrine called blood atonement.
In Mormonism, what blood atonement is that a person who has fallen, a son of perdition, can be saved by a chosen person killing him. So it becomes this license to kill.
Blood atonement had been advocated by Mormon prophet Brigham Young over 100 years earlier. In 1856, Young said that when a person violates a covenant with God, their own blood must atone for it. The LDS Church denounces blood atonement in 1889. But Ervil LeBaron resurrects it to motivate his followers to do the unthinkable.
This blood atonement doctrine is what gave Ervil the basis to gather his disciples around him.
Along with the defectors from Joel's church, Ervil draws followers from his legion of 13 wives. Some will die because of him. Others will kill for him. Others still will breed an army of assassins for his upcoming holy war. Most are convinced that blood atonement is truly a divine principle, and that their patriarch really is the one mighty and strong.
You think of a religious figure, all of a sudden he's talking about whacking people and killing people, that his followers would recoil and run in the other direction. But within the framework of Mormon fundamentalism, it made total sense.
The true extent of Ervil's influence over his flock becomes clear in August of 1972. His brother, Joel LeBaron, travels to Ensenada, Mexico on church business. Ervil's faithful are waiting.
We knew it was coming. We knew that there was no way of stopping him.
Ervil's chief lieutenant, a man named Daniel Jordan, killed Joel in August of 1972.
Like the biblical tale of Cain and Abel, the brotherly feud has ended in blood. Joel's sister-in-law, Charlotte, takes the news hard.
We had been worried about it for a long time, but it was a blow. It was a blow. My children were all crying and weeping, and I mean, we were so shocked.
But if Ervil believed his bloody coup d'etat would send Joel's followers flocking to him, he's mistaken. Instead, Joel's devotees rally around the LeBaron's younger brother, Verlin. Ervil now has a new enemy.
Now that he'd gotten rid of Joel, his next chief target was Verlin.
My husband by then had become president of the church, and he was Ervil's main target.
In fear of Ervil's wrath, Verlin LeBaron goes on the run.
Both in Mexico and in the United States, the law officers told him to not let his presence be known if he went and visited relatives, if he came home to see his wives and his children, that not to stay too long, and that while he was there, he needed to know that he was endangering other people's lives.
To bind his followers together, Ervil also uses a strategy common to other cult leaders. He builds paranoia that outside forces are closing in.
He kept us constantly hyped on the idea that people were out to get us, that our work was so important in the eyes of the Lord that the forces of evil were going to try and kill us.
Say he had a tongue of gold, he could convince the devil to go to church, so he was just a good brainwasher.
Emboldened by the murder of his brother Joel, Ervil will commission more attacks on his own flesh and blood.
People you knew were all now potential hitmen. There were threats of them coming to bomb Colonia LeBaron. Everybody was a watchman. Everybody was on their toes.
By the end of the 1970s, some media will be calling Ervil LeBaron the Mormon Manson.
It becomes this kind of blood orgy.
When Colonia LeBaron was founded by a Mormon fundamentalist family in 1944, it was supposed to be a promised land. But in just a few short decades, the town would be living in fear of an evil spawned from within.
They had a night watch. They had people watching the town and always alert and ready for action if necessary.
The reason for the fear, is self-styled prophet Ervil LeBaron. In 1972, he orders the murder of older brother Joel.
Ervil claimed to be a prophet, and he actually had his brother Joel put to death. He didn't do it himself, but he had somebody go kill him.
Ervil has started his own fundamentalist Mormon church, drawing followers mostly from his 13 wives and children, and motivating them with a deadly doctrine called blood atonement.
It was very, very sick, warped, and terrible, terrible teaching that he taught.
Across the American Southwest, several different sects of Mormon fundamentalists are living their own versions of polygamy and competing for members. In 1974, Ervil LeBaron tours their communities, trying to gain converts and donations to the church he has founded.
He said he was the head of a political kingdom of God and that the world would be under his jurisdiction and rule. We were to start obeying the rules or we would have to suffer the death penalty.
He had been up to see the fundamentalists in some of their businesses and let them know that he wanted to start receiving tithing from them. And if they didn't, they would be in danger of the judgment.
Against the heavens.
But Ervil's efforts are to no avail. So he embarks on another strategy to gain converts by eliminating the competition. Starting with his brother Ervil LeBaron, head of the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times.
He was after my grandfather for years and years.
In 1974, Ervil hears that Ervil might be hiding at a polygamous colony in Baja California called Los Molinos. He orders his faithful to launch an attack.
The attack on Los Molinos, that was horrible. That was horrible.
Ervil's wife, Charlotte LeBaron, is in the colony when Ervil's henchmen storm it.
And I never forget, I went to the window and I could see the tall house was on fire. And I says, it's Ervil's people.
Charlotte's home is burned to the ground. 13 people are wounded, 2 shot dead. But Ervil is not in the colony. He's hiding in Nicaragua. So Ervil concocts a diabolical Plan B.
So the most amazing tactic that Ervil came up with was he thought, if I kill another Mormon fundamentalist leader, Ervil will have to come to the funeral, and then I can kill Ervil at the funeral.
The man singled out to die is Rulon C. Allred, head of a polygamous sect in Salt Lake City.
I grew up in his group, and he was really a wonderful man. At the time when I knew him, he had 7 wives.
But in 1977, Ervil tells his followers that the Lord wants Rulon Allred to be blood atoned. His 13th wife, Rena, is allegedly chosen as the assassin. She walks into Rulon Allred's office in Salt Lake City and shoots him dead. Ervil LeBaron takes the bait and comes out of hiding to attend Rulon's funeral. But so do 2,600 other mourners, so Ervil's assassins can't carry out their hit.
They were thwarted in doing it. There was just too many people around, so they backed out of it.
While Ervil's deadly hit squads roam from Utah to Mexico, in Colonial LeBaron, where inhabitants are loyal to the slain prophet Joel LeBaron, a culture of terror reigns.
Joel's death had been a real source of fear to us. With the attack on Los Molinos, people actually being killed there and wounded, we knew that he was serious about it. We were continually being followed by their people, and telephone calls of a threatening nature.
I actually moved down to Nicaragua for 2.5 years because I was on his death list and trying to keep from getting killed. I know I'd go to bed and think if somebody came here in the night to kill me, what child do I take? You got 10 kids, who you grabbing?
Treason against the heavens.
As well as members of Joel's church, Ervil also applies his blood atonement edicts to anyone who threatens his group. In 1975, on his orders, his followers allegedly murder a female member who has threatened to talk to police. Later that year in San Diego, his 10th wife, Vonda White, shoots a male member who wants to leave Ervil's cult. In 1977, one of Ervil's daughters is also allegedly murdered on his orders. To his devotees, many who are his own flesh and blood, the message is clear: obey or die.
So there was an element of terror also in keeping people tied to Ervil.
Not one of the victims dies by Ervil's own hand. A fact that often attracts comparison with 1960s cult leader Charles Manson.
Both didn't like to get blood on their own hands. They much preferred their followers to go out and do their dirty work for them.
What's driving Ervil's murderous desire? Author Scott Anderson believes the only answer is clinical insanity, that his followers mistake for divine guidance.
As the killings went on, it was clear to a normal person that he was becoming mentally unhinged. But to his followers, you're inside this hermetically sealed goldfish bowl where really crazy and really erratic behavior was in a way just more signs of Ervil's godliness.
But by the late 1970s, American justice catches up with Ervil and his cult. In 1979, his 10th wife, Vonda White, is sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a former follower in San Diego. Then in 1980, Ervil himself goes on trial in Utah for masterminding the murder of Rulon Allred. Ervil's brother Verlin testifies against him, along with one of Ervil's sons. Ervil is convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But the murder spree isn't over.
In prison, he wrote this massive 600-page tract called The Book of New Covenants. To most people, it just read as religious gibberish, kind of half-mad rambles. But in fact, what Ervil had done was he had hidden the names of 50 to 55 apostates who he wanted whatever followers he had left to blood atone.
His manifesto complete, Ervil LeBaron dies of heart failure behind bars in 1981. In an ironic twist, on almost the very same day that Ervil dies, his brother Verlin, who he had pursued for a decade, dies in a car accident in Mexico City.
It was a head-on accident. Apparently, it was a divided highway, and a car coming in the other direction came across the median strip, and it was just a head-on crash into Verlin's car, killed Verlin and another person. So there was speculation that finally Ervil was carrying out the hit on Verlin.
Some of Verlin's younger children have been told that their father was killed by Ervil's people. I absolutely do not have any foundation for that belief.
But the final horrifying chapter of the Mormon Manson's reign of terror remains to be written. In 1981, cult leader Ervil LeBaron dies in a Utah prison. Many believe the killing spree of the man dubbed the Mormon Manson is over. But he has left behind a coded hit list.
He had hidden the names of 50 to 55 apostates who he wanted whatever followers he had left to blood atone.
The book also names Ervil's successor as head of his vindictive church. The son of his first wife, Delphina, Arthur, takes on the role. But within 2 years, infighting among the church's faithful leads to Arthur's murder. This clears the path for another son, 20-year-old Ervil LeBaron, to ascend to power. Raised in a culture where murder is sanctioned by God, Ervil LeBaron will continue his father's violent legacy.
Everyone's terrified of Ervil LeBaron. Really the most kind of sociopathic of this remnant of the LeBaron family that's left that's carrying out these murders.
These remnant members of Ervil's church may be few, but what they lack in numbers, they make up for in deadly zeal.
His last followers had the Book of New Covenants, and they started hunting down the people on the list.
In the years after Ervil's death, up to 10 murders are committed by his followers in America. Most of the victims are former members deemed to be apostates or heretics. But in the days leading up to June 27, 1988, cult members plot the most audacious massacre of all.
The 4 o'clock murders was a name given to this astonishing quadruple homicide that occurred in Texas.
In his manifesto, Ervil had identified former church members, Mark Chenoweth, Dwayne Chenoweth, and Eddie Marston, as traitors who needed to be blood atoned.
They had been 3 of Ervil's closest lieutenants. They had now left the church.
It was decided that all 3 must die exactly at 4 o'clock on June 27, 1988. For Ervil's faithful assassins, the date has spiritual significance.
That was almost exactly the time that Joseph Smith, the founder and the first prophet of the Mormon Church, was killed in 1844.
But the timing also has a practical purpose.
If they killed one of them, the other 2 were going to disappear. So they realized they needed to kill all 3 at the same time in 3 different places.
In different parts of Texas, driving identical cars,
I'm ready and in position.
Wearing identical suits, Ervil's murderous followers synchronize their watches and ready their weapons. Houston, 4 o'clock. Mark Chenoweth is shot in his office. Dallas, 4 o'clock. Eddie Marston is slain. Houston, 4 o'clock. Dwayne Chenoweth is also gunned down. Then, his 8-year-old daughter, Jennifer.
She was murdered also because she was the eyewitness to the murders. So there were 4 people killed.
But these brazen murders will signal the beginning of the end for the cult's vicious vendetta. The killers had worn identical suits and driven identical stolen cars in an effort to confuse investigators. But a routine traffic stop will foil their plans to escape the law.
A few days later, they're still driving the stolen pickup trucks. And they're stopped in Phoenix with the stolen pickup trucks.
The killers are brought to justice, including Ervil LeBaron, who receives 4 life sentences for his role in the 4 o'clock murders. The last of those involved, Jacqueline Tarsa LeBaron, is caught in 2010 and sentenced to 3 years in prison. In all, the horrific body count attributed to the cult of Ervil LeBaron is estimated at up to 30.
There was an ingenuity, a kind of a diabolical ingenuity about this cult. I mean, it started under Ervil, but it continued under his sons and daughters.
Today, it's believed the church started by Ervil LeBaron is no more. But in Colonia LeBaron, the fundamentalist church founded by his brother Joel continues to this day. On Sundays, armed men often guard worshipers entering Joel's church because another evil has risen against the colony.
We started hearing about deaths, and We started realizing this was getting really bad. It was getting really out of hand.
Starting in 2006, rival Mexican drug gangs fight a vicious war for control of the border zones. By 2009, the body count passes 15,000. Suddenly, the once peaceful country surrounding Colonia LeBaron is awash with illegal guns and outlaws looking for ways to get rich quick.
They started kidnapping a lot of innocent people for just kidnapping them for money. They were searching out wealthy people.
In the decade since Alma de LeBaron came to Mexico, Colonia LeBaron has advanced. It's grown from just a single founding family to around 1,200 citizens. Many LeBarons intermarried with Mexicans and learned Spanish. But many also take advantage of ties to their motherland, retaining American citizenship, and running lucrative export businesses of the pecans and other crops they cultivate. Thriving farms, big houses, expensive cars. To local criminals, all this spells dollar signs.
Being very prosperous in the LeBaron community, we knew that we were a target.
Colonia LeBaron, Mexico. Throughout the 1970s, the inhabitants of the town were subjected to a brutal vendetta by a murderous cult leader named Ervil LeBaron. But after that evil passes, the town prospers.
We've been very fortunate because most of us have dual citizenship, so we can go to the U.S. and work, bring back some money, and start something.
But in the wake of a drug war starting in 2006, lawlessness explodes in northern Mexico, making the colony a target of violence once again. On May 2nd, 2009, 16-year-old Ervil LeBaron is kidnapped from Colonia LeBaron by a drug gang. They demand a $1 million ransom. The men of the colony come together to decide how to respond to this new threat.
We got together and had a meeting with Eric's father, Joel, and told him, hey, whatever your choice is, whatever we can do to help, we're there.
One option was all arm ourselves and go look for him. And the other option was, do we pay the ransom? And everybody said, no, if we pay the ransom, they're going to be back tomorrow for 2 more.
As for using guns to settle conflict, the LeBarons have lived through that during Ervil's murderous spree, and know it can only lead to more violence.
The LeBaron people were in a sense, spiritual, and it would go against our conscience and our religious belief to arm ourselves and go up in war.
So instead of paying the ransom or taking up arms, the LeBarons do something almost no one in Mexico dares to do. They stand up in public to demand action.
Our entire community went. We petitioned the government, and we're at the state capitol for 3 days. We blocked the streets and just held signs. We're kind of on strike. It had never been done before.
The LeBarons appealed to the government to do their duty and protect its citizens.
We had a meeting with the governor, and we pushed, and we said we wouldn't leave this place until Eric was free.
Incredibly, it works. The kidnapped boy is released by his captors and returns to the colony. No one knows how the government negotiated his release. All they know is he's free.
We got him back safe. We felt, we got it was victory. What we did was the best thing we could have done.
For the LeBarons, it's a triumph for nonviolent action. For the drug lords, it's a humiliation that must be avenged.
After Eric got kidnapped, there were many threats to the town.
One of those who is threatened is Eric's brother, Benjamin. He speaks out in public opposition to the tyranny of kidnapping and extortion sweeping Mexico.
His life got threatened many times, and he kept doing his thing, you know.
Midnight on July 7th, 2009. Masked men gather outside Benjamin LeBaron's home and start trying to gain entry. He calls his neighbor, Luis Widmar.
First reaction was call whoever was closest to him. Luis, obviously you don't know what's going on, didn't realize the magnitude of what was happening.
Meanwhile, another neighbor sees the trucks and calls Lenzo Widmar.
Sister Ruth lives directly in front of him, and my phone rang and she said, hey, something's happening at Benji's house. And I asked her what, and she's in panic and said, I don't know, get over here.
As Lenzo rushes to the scene, the gang resort to extreme measures to get Benjamin to come out.
After threatening Benjamin's family with a hand grenade, he opened the door so they wouldn't hurt his family.
As Benjamin is dragged from his home, his neighbor and brother-in-law, Luis, appears.
And they took him out and took Benjamin and was there loading them in the truck. Lorenzo showed up in his Suburban, and these guys opened fire.
One man opened fire, then another one opened fire, and then two stood up and opened fire.
Violence has again struck the LeBaron clan, and what happens next will change their community forever. On the outskirts of Colonia LeBaron, Lenzo Widmar relives the moment he was almost killed by a Mexican drug gang.
We got bullet holes here. And here, this one went all the way through to the other side. There's one down here. And this is the one that hit me.
After having his bullet wound patched up, Lenzo went in search of his kidnapped relatives, Benjamin LeBaron and Luis Widmar.
This is where I found Luis's and Benji's body the night they were killed. I showed up here with the state police, and I believe Benjamin was laying right here and Luis right here, face down in the dirt. They were shot in the back of the head, apparently execution style. I do have a lot of anger bottled up inside of me, especially when I remember looking at Luis and Benji thrown on the ground there, you know, seeing their lifeless bodies there. So yeah, there was a sign posted right up there that said, "This is a warning to the LeBaron people." And it was kind of a threat to the LeBaron people to back off with supporting government and catching these guys.
But the tough people of Colonia LeBaron do not back off. They use their dual nationality to demand justice for the murders from the governments in Mexico and the USA. Within months, authorities arrest an alleged kingpin of the Juarez cartel, Jose El Requin Escajeda.
He was the main head honcho around this area. They linked it to him that he actually ordered the hit on Benjamin.
With Escajeda imprisoned in America, the Juarez cartel is weakened. But for months, Colonia LeBaron fears further reprisals. So just as they did when threatened by Ervil LeBaron's followers, they begin a night watch.
We come up here to this spot and, you know, just watch the whole town. The word went around that we had high-powered rifles and whatnot up here. We're ready to shoot anybody that was that got in our way. Obviously we didn't, but it was a good hearsay that went around.
But today, there's no need for rumors about weapons. Respected and influential have these third-generation American transplants become that the Mexican government has stationed 50 heavily armed police to guard their tiny colony.
There's a lot of people in the area that say, oh, why do these LeBarones get so much help? Why not everybody else? I think it's because we squeal louder. And we're willing to not participate in crime. At the contrary, we're willing to participate to catch these guys.
With no major incidents since 2009, the LeBaron's policies of nonviolent resistance and refusal to pay ransom seem to be making their colony safer. And while the LeBaron name was once synonymous with Ervil's murderous spree, today the new generation of LeBarons are making a stand for peace.
I'm trying to give us a good face, you know, try to rectify the wrong that Ervil, you could say, did for us as a community, as a people. We're not that way in the least sense. We're the complete opposite.
As a new era dawns for the LeBaron colony, it seems even the practice that brought Alma Dea LeBaron here in the first place is changing. Today, weddings in the colony are most often between one woman and one man. Because of cultural and economic pressures, polygamy is fading.
I believe it's slowly but surely being done away with, but it's not that we're ashamed of it or anything like that. I'm proud of where I come from. I really am.
In the years since they came to Mexico to find peace, these sons and daughters of America have battled evils from without and within. But their colony has weathered the storm. And its greatest strength in the future may be the spirit forged in its tumultuous past.
I think because of these events, it's made us stop and recollect our thoughts. So we're definitely progressing in our values. We're progressing in industry. You know, our farms are growing. These events have made us more courageous people. They've brought us closer together as a community. We've been able to overlook a lot of differences and focus more on looking out for each other.